Hey everyone, today I'm going to be doing a video going over the pistol qualification course for the state of Oregon for anyone doing armed security. When you take your armed security course and you take your live fire training, this is basically the qualification course that you have to be able to pass in order to carry a gun as an armed security professional in the state of Oregon. This may carry over to other states as well, but again, this is what I know for the state of Oregon. This is a test that I've helped administer several times when I was working as an instructor for a company that I used to work for. So it's a course that I've run myself through plenty of times. So I'm going to give you kind of a quick overview. Of course, I left my shot timer at home, so I'm going to be using the video after the fact to see how long each segment took me, because each course of fire is timed, but in my opinion, you have plenty of time to do it, so we shouldn't have any issues. Now, this is actually a video that was more or less requested by some of my patrons. Actually, the guy who requested it specifically lives here locally, and I just saw him at the shop where I was picking up these targets at beforehand. So I got to talk to him for a little bit and let him know I was doing this. Anyway, what I'm going to be doing for this course of fire is using my standard carry gun. This is typically my everyday carry gun, or if I'm working an armed security job, this is the kind of gun I would have on me, but I'll kind of touch on that and some other details after the course of fire is over, when I give some of my recommendations and advice for anyone who's going to be taking this course of fire, or anyone who wants to basically take the armed security test here in the state of Oregon. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead, move back to the 10-yard line, and we will do our first course of fire back there. So for this first course of fire, it's going to be 3 rounds from behind a barricade. Now, just to kind of demonstrate, you don't need anything fancy to be able to practice for this kind of test. I'm just using a trash can that's here on the range that I'm shooting at. Again, I have that B-27 target at 10 yards. For the first stage, you're going to do 1 round from the right side, 1 round over the top, 1 round to the left. Now, in my experience, the instructors that teach this course, if you're left-handed, they don't mind if you start on the left, but it's 1 round from the right side, 1 over the top, 1 from the left. Generally speaking, again, each instructor might have a slightly different way that they're going to administer this portion of the test, but the general scheme is, again, 10 yards, 3 rounds from a kneeling position behind cover. I believe the time limit for this is 10 seconds, but we should definitely not need all that time. Hopefully the autofocus on this camera will be able to track me as I move around, but without any further ado, let me go ahead and get my ears ready to go. And we'll see how well I do at this. It's been a while since I've done this test again, so hopefully things will go well. But, okay. Okay, so that's the first step done. Should have been under 10 seconds. Be surprised if it wasn't. Looks like I'm right around dancing around that 10 ring. So let's go ahead and move on to the second course of fire. Okay, so from this second stage, it's going to be 3 cycles of 2 well-aimed shots, drawing, firing 2, and then reholstering in between each. I believe the time limit is going to be 4 seconds per 2 shots. So let's see if I can keep these, again, all within the 10 ring. But again, I'm playing with fire right now. So again, draw, fire 2, come back, and reholster. Again, whoever is proctoring this test might have little variations of what they want you to do in between, like before you reholster, if they want you to look around or whatever. But again, the general gist of it is 2 rounds, again at 7 yards, 3 times. Okay, so again, second round over. I believe all of those volleys should have been under 4 seconds. Again, I'll time it once I'm going through and editing this. And I'm still kind of dancing around. Got some shots where I wanted them, some shots a little bit high. So let's move on to the next stage. Okay, so for this stage, we're at 5 yards, and we're going to be shooting 2 rounds. We're going to be drawing, firing 2 rounds. At that point, your gun will be empty. We'll perform a reload, cycle the slide, and fire 6 more rounds center mass. So we're firing a total of 8 rounds, I believe, for 10 seconds. So as before, you had time to kind of take 2 well-aimed shots. This one, you have to be a little bit quicker on. So we'll see, again, we'll see how I do. It's been a while since I've done something like this. Oh, man. Okay, opened it up a little bit, and I'll go ahead, reload my magazines, and we'll finish off with the last 2 stages of this test. Okay, so now we are 3 yards from our target. For this test, we're drawing, firing 3 hands strong side only, coming back, transitioning to our weak hand, and firing 3 rounds weak hand only. This can be really hard for a lot of people because they don't train with it, but again, we can talk about that a little bit more at the end. Let's go ahead and see how I do. It's been a while for me also. Okay, so now let's go ahead and do the final drill, which is at 2 yards. Okay, so for the final step of this drill, what we're going to do is we're going to draw, and then firing from a retention position, fire 2 rounds center mass. Now in the past, when I've done a little bit better and I'm dealing with just the 10 ring, this is where I've thrown off my perfect scores before. We'll see if I can do any better now. This might be slightly closer than 2 yards, but you know, for what we're doing, it'll work. So we're going to draw and then fire 2 rounds from our retention position, and both of these rounds should be coming out pretty quick. You don't have time to do, you know, obviously you're not doing sight acquisition between each shot, but 2 theoretically well-aimed shots from a retention position with your support hand out of the way. Wish me luck. Yep, and sure enough, stayed definitely within the passing area, but threw them off well from where they're supposed to be. So let's go ahead and look at our target and kind of wrap up our thoughts, give you some recommendations and suggestions of how to, I guess, practice this test or administer this test to yourself just as a measure of your skill level. And in case anyone was wondering, the jacket that I was using to do this test, because it does have the little cutouts here on the side to be able to make it easier to draw, this is actually one of these soft shell jackets from Cannae OreGear. I'll have a link to those below. It definitely makes drawing a lot handier. And then if you know you're in a situation where you don't actively feel like you're gonna have to draw, you can zip them down, keep yourself a little bit warmer, and then you just have to put a little bit more effort into drawing your gun out. But definitely a jacket that I really enjoy. I'll probably have a full-fledged review on it sometime in the near future. Okay, so that's it. That's really all that's required. I believe it's a total of 25 rounds, and the furthest you're shooting is 10 yards. And theoretically, shooting from a kneeling position, you're pretty well supported. So realistically, no one should have any trouble passing this test. At least anyone who plans on carrying a gun for a living should not struggle at all to pass this test. So that's why I try to put on myself, trying to keep it all within the 10 ring, which again, it's been a while, no excuses though. We still did not quite succeed at that. Now, my understanding is for this test, in order to pass, all these shots have to lie within the outside ring, the 7 ring right here. As long as you can do that, as far as the state of Oregon is concerned, you, and again, assuming you've passed the other qualifications and everything else, this is only the firing portion, then you are good to go to carry a gun for a living here in this state. So the first, I guess I probably should have taken pictures of the target in between, but with the first volley at 10 yards, I had 2 kind of up close to here and 1 still within this little X ring. Pretty good. Again, not the best I've ever done, but you know, it's definitely not terrible. And honestly, in my experience with it helping administer this test when I was working as an instructor again for that former company, that's where people struggle the most. At 10 yards kneeling. Now, it could be the fact that people are really nervous about the fact that they're about to take this test. Part of it could just be that they've never shot from a kneeling position before. Now again, and typically before you take this part of the test, you've gone through like a full 8-hour shooting class. So theoretically, during that shooting class, you should have been shooting from the kneeling, but nonetheless, that's where I see people struggle with the most. So if I were to tell you what to practice, if you have a place where you can practice shooting from the kneeling around some sort of barricade, even if it's just a trash can like I was using today. But again, we did pretty good there. Then moving in close, doing the draw and firing 2, still kept it pretty close. Where we really started to open it up was with the shooting 6 rounds in quick succession, and then shooting single hand, left-handed and right-handed. So again, the biggest issue I see with people is shooting from 10 yards kneeling. The second biggest issue for people is shooting strong hand only and weak hand only. So again, if you can practice anything else, practice shooting strong hand only. You may notice that your point of impact starts to shift just because of the recoil impulse and all that, and especially with your support hand. That's where we started to get these rounds down low and to the left here. Then at that point, we did the final iteration, and that's what these 2 rounds are right here. From your retention position, that's where my 2 rounds went. Now again, we're still within the 9 ring. Obviously, I'd like to keep it as tight as I possibly can. So yeah, that works, but again, we definitely want to keep that in. The 10 yards is where people have the most trouble. 3 yards is where people tend to have the second most amount of trouble, and this is where I have the most trouble. Because at least with every other iteration of this test, I have the opportunity to pick up my sight alignment, sight picture, and get good, nice, squeezed off rounds right where I want it to go. Now, when I'm doing it down here, I don't have the benefit of having a perfect sight picture. Now, there are definitely things you can do. There's techniques that help improve your speed and accuracy from shooting from somewhere down here. However, again, that's just where I struggle the most. It's something I don't practice a lot, and obviously something I need to practice more because those were my worst shots. Now, again, it kind of depends on who your instructor is and how they want to administer this part of the test, but some recommendations for shooting from this position right here. Now, obviously, unless you are consciously wanting to pull the trigger, your finger should be straight and off the trigger. And what that allows you to do is basically use your index finger as a reference point of where that gun is pointed. So if you have your finger straight along the slide of the barrel, or slide of the gun, more or less wherever your finger point, at least at this close distance, wherever your finger is pointed, that's more or less where your barrel is going to be pointed. And again, we're pretty intuitive at it, but it's something you definitely want to practice with, because once you get good at it, get practiced at it, you can realistically use that finger, point where you want it to go, and keep all those shots nice and tight and in the center. Kind of some other tips just as for this test as a whole, or recommendations I would have for you. The biggest thing is I would recommend that you do this test with the gun that you are either going to be carrying for those of you who aren't working security, or the gun that you're going to be carrying for those of you who are doing security in your duty holster or whatever else. Now, with that said, I also recommend that you use the holster that you're going to use on the job. So again, for people in everyday carry, use your carry holster. For those of you doing this as some sort of duty position, have your duty holster. It's going to do you no good to get all your practice with an inside the waistband holster and then start carrying outside the waistband, or vice versa, carrying it using like a, outside the waistband 3 o'clock holster when you're carrying appendix, or if you're carrying 4 o'clock concealed. So use the holster that you're actually going to be using in whatever scenario you're going to find yourself in. Now, the last one can be kind of tricky, but if you can afford it, I would recommend, at least when you're practicing this yourself, using the carry ammo that you're going to be using on the job. Because a lot of us, myself included, for this, I was using some just regular Fiocchi 9mm full metal jacket ammo. However, I typically carry 150 grain Federal HSTs. There is a different feel from the HSTs to the 115 grain full metal jacket. So if you can afford it, I would recommend that you administer this test to yourself at least once a year, maybe, using the ammo that you're actually carrying, either concealed or when you're on duty. But again, this is pretty much it. Now, again, there is a lot more that goes into getting your armed security license than just this 25-shot trial. There's, a full 2-day in-class written part, and then there's an 8-hour live fire training course. They might split up the time differently depending on where you take your class, but that's generally how I've seen it done. And then every year you have to requalify and basically show that your skills are up to par. You'd be amazed how many people struggle again with this test. Again, we're shooting at the furthest at 10 yards, and you have well over, I don't know, probably 24 inches from side to side that you can get your rounds into, and people struggle with it. And new shooters or just people who don't get as much practice as they should. However, for people who do practice on a regular basis, this is not any issue whatsoever. In fact, before I administered this test myself, I was helping a friend of mine who's going to be going through armed security training soon, and he wanted to just get a feel for what this test was. So having never done it before, and he was shooting a 10 millimeter with full power loads, so he had some other stuff working against him. Having never done this before, was able to keep all of his rounds within the 7 ring. His was a little bit more spaced out, but again, shooting a 10 millimeter and shooting, having not shot this before, I think that's pretty acceptable. This is something I think everyone should do. And again, even if you're not doing armed security work, if you're just a concealed carrier, I think this is a good way to quantify your skills. It's a lot more useful information than just going out shooting at a piece of paper on a bright sunny Sunday afternoon and not really gaining anything from that practice. So get out, run yourself through this test. If you don't have a shot timer, it's no big deal. Especially if you're not actually doing armed security, just kind of give yourself rough approximations of the times. If I didn't mention the times at each stage, I'll have had that at the bottom of the screen. But again, I just think this is a good way to kind of measure skill and measure kind of your growth as a shooter when you're running through this type of test. So I'd recommend it, again, not just to people who are going through armed security, but anyone who carries a gun on a regular basis, especially concealed carriers. Because honestly, in my opinion, this is purely my opinion, I don't think it's responsible for you to carry a gun if you cannot pass this. Because if you can't get within the 7 ring at 10 yards and closer under the tiny amount of stress that is a shot timer, how in the hell are you going to do it under the stress of being in defense of your life or a loved one's life? I think that's absolutely ridiculous to assume that. So again, I recommend that you administer this test to yourself if you carry a gun. And if you can't do that, I would strongly consider maybe keeping the gun at home until you put the time and effort into training to where you can actually do this. So take that for what you will. I know I can't force you to do that. As a very pro-Constitution person, I think as many law-abiding citizens should carry firearms, but I think that should also be done responsibly, and making sure you can pass a very simple course of fire like this is, I think, one of those aspects of being a responsible concealed carrier. But again, sorry I got all preachy there, but nonetheless, that is my feelings on the topic. So, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, go ahead and throw those in the comment section down below. If you live in a different state or you have different requirements that you are held to, I'm definitely interested to hear those. So throw those in the comment section. I'd be interested to kind of run myself through some of those also. Again, but this is just what I'm familiar with and what we do here in the state of Oregon. Now, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this was a video that was specifically requested by someone on my Patreon page. So if you feel so inclined, go ahead and check that out. I post exclusive content there, as well as uploading all my videos there early. And obviously, the people who support me on Patreon go a long way in helping fund videos like this, where I have to be able to buy the B-27 targets, which I don't normally train on. So that directly funded this video. Especially since YouTube is just doing their damnedest to demonetize any video they can, although thankfully I've won all the appeals I've done so far. But nonetheless, anyway, I definitely appreciate those of you who are supporting me on Patreon. But with all that said, as always, I hope you're able to get something out of this video, and I really appreciate you watching.